Hi everybody, and welcome back to Murder at Bedtime with me, your host Lyndon. If you are a returning listener, you know by now I think you are all awesome and appreciate so much you watching my channel. And if this is your first time, I really do hope I can persuade you to stay. Murder at Bedtime is a 15 to 20 minute, no frills, no waffle, true crime bedtime story. Any waffle is at the end, so you can switch me off at the end of the story, or you can listen on to me spouting a load of gobbledygook. I just wanted to add, I've mixed things up a bit with this British oldie but goodie this week. I've used a bit of poetic license by making this more of a storyteller story. And with that, let's get serious and crack on with a story that I've named A Jar of Your Finest Dripping, Please, Missus. Julia Thomas came rushing through her door at 2 Vine Cottages, Park Road, Richmond. Never before in her life had she had to leave church early, but here she was, red-faced, sweating, out of breath, bonnet askew, after running as fast as her little legs would carry her. Hoping that infernal woman had cleared off, but without cleaning her out of all her jewellery, antiques and money. Hadn't she been a fair employer, for goodness sake? She had even allowed her a half day on Sundays to visit her young son. Unfortunately, the draw of the hole-in-the-wall pub next door had become steadily too much. The woman's work had suffered, and in truth, it had never ever really been that good. It was insufferable, and she had to go. Even when she gave her notice to leave, she had allowed herself to be persuaded to let her stay until after the weekend. But tonight's behaviour was the last straw. She had been late getting back from seeing her son and had stank of booze. She had just one job to do, and that was to get her ready for evensong at the church, but she couldn't even do that, forcing her to set off to church feeling improperly dressed. When she arrived, she told her friend how she had rowed with that woman over her preposterous behaviour and would have to leave early because she needed to be out of her house tonight. She really shouldn't have been under this kind of stress. She was 54 years old, for goodness sake. All the way home, she chunted her way to herself, cursing her friend Miss Loader for recommending the woman and herself for not asking for more references. When she entered the house, she couldn't believe it. She was still here, and she thought she heard something said about money owed, but she dismissively waved her away and went up the stairs to her bedroom to remove her hat and coat. Moments later, as she put her hat in its box, she felt someone behind her. She was shocked at the impertinence of the woman entering her bedroom without permission, but not as shocked as she was when a second later she had a searing pain on the side of her head, nearly making her pass out. She turned to see the woman stood in front of her holding an axe. She managed to swerve round her, but she was feeling giddy. She made it to the staircase, still shouting her protestations at her assailant, but the woman strode towards her and shoved her, and down the staircase she went. When she reached the bottom, she knew she was badly hurt. She couldn't move and could only whimper for help. She saw a dark form descending the stairs. A face came close to hers. She could smell the ale on its breath. Then she felt strong fingers around her throat, and everything went black. Kate Webster sat on the stairs, looking down at her former employer, thinking, I've really gone and done it this time. Maybe that it cantankerous, picky and overexcitable ex-schoolmistress didn't even deserve to be hit with an axe, thrown down the stairs and strangled. Ah well, she thought, what's done is done. Now to try and get myself out of this pickle. She rose to her feet, grabbed Miss Thomas by her ankles and dragged her into the kitchen. Then, with firstly the help of a razor and then a meat saw, she removed Julia's head, and then she cut, sawed and axed her way through the rest of her body, making a big slice into her abdomen to get everything out of there. She then got a really good fire going under the laundry copper. Conveniently, Miss Thomas had a top of the range one for the time, and started feeding the body parts into the boiling water to stop identification, and then she started placing bones in the fire underneath. After a time, and feeling a bit parched, Kate popped next door for some refreshment, taking a couple of jars of a freshly made special dripping, as you may call it, to sell to fellow regulars. And when suitably refreshed and returned to the house, it was now a case of what to do with all these remains. She remembered that Miss Thomas had a very nice large Gladstone bag and a bonnet box. When she had packed these as full as she could, she just couldn't find the room for the head and one foot. Never mind, she would have to dispose of these later separately. She formulated a plan in her head. She would visit her ex-neighbours, the Porters in Hammersmith. She hadn't seen them for 6 years. Plenty of time for her to be married, had a son, been widowed and left a big house in her will by a distant aunt. Yes, that would work, and the Porters would be useful. So off she went with a very heavy Gladstone bag to see them. Of course, they then trotted off to a pub, the men taking it in turns to carry the bag. And no one batted an eyelid when Kate excused herself for a moment, left the pub with the Gladstone bag, and returned not long after it without it. She had dumped it over Barnes Bridge into the River Thames. So Kate thought to herself, I wonder if I can get the young lad Robert to accompany me home and help me carry the bonnet box. Of course, he readily agreed. Robert carried the box for her until by the river she told him she was meeting someone who was buying the box, and if he carried on walking she would catch him up when the business was done. As soon as Robert was out of sight, she threw the box in the river and hurried on to catch the young lad up. Our murderess now decided it was time to go back to Vine Cottage and clear up a bit. She was pretty amazed at how much blood and gore came out of her body, and as we know, Kate's cleaning left a bit to be desired. But she did manage to find time to deposit the remaining foot on a manure heap in Twickenham. However, Kate's good mood was somewhat dented by newspaper reports that a coal man had found the box of body parts on the bank of the river. The box contained a woman's torso, missing its entrails and legs apart from one foot. Not being able to identify the woman, the papers were calling it the Barnes mystery. Kate was now swanning around in Julia Thomas's finery, signing for deliveries, etc., and even pawning Julia's dental plate with gold teeth on it. She now decided to sell everything in the house, and luckily she found a buyer for it all. a pub landlord called John Church, who met Kate for a drink or two on more than one occasion, did the deal with a spit in the handshake. On March the 18th, John Church arrived at Vine Cottages with the removal wagon and 2 men. Kate was standing at the front door of the house waiting for them, but before they could get to her, they are waylaid by landlady, neighbour and unofficial head of the neighbourhood watch, Miss Ives, who asks on whose authority they are being employed. They reply, Miss Thomas, and point at Kate. Straight away, she knew the game was up and it was time for her and her son to get out of Dodge fast. And miraculously, before the police arrived, they had skedaddled and managed to make it all the way back to Ireland, where they were put up by Kate's uncle on his farm, him knowing nothing about what had occurred in England. Kate thought she was now totally safe, so was shocked to say the least when a month later 2 Scotland Yard detectives turned up at her uncle's farm to arrest her. She had left a letter with her uncle's address at Julia Thomas's house. She was in for an even bigger shock when she saw the crowds at every railway station on her journey back from Liverpool to London, shouting abuse and jeering her. Kate Webster went on trial at the Old Bailey in London on the 2nd of July 1879. She tried to implicate Henry Porter and John Church, but they both had strong alibis. Also, a hat maker called Mary Durden gave evidence for the prosecution, telling the court that on the 25th of February, Kate told her that she was going to Birmingham to take control of property, jewellery, etc., left to her by an aunt who had recently died, which the prosecution claimed was clear evidence of premeditation. On the 8th of July, the jury only took 1 hour to find her guilty of murder. Before sentencing, Kate had one last rabbit to pull out of the hat and declared she was pregnant. At this time, she was taken into a side room and examined by a jury of matrons, who came back after whatever their examination consisted of and declared her not to be with child. Consequently, Kate was sentenced to death, and on Tuesday the 29th of July 1879 at Wandsworth Prison, she became one of the first people to be hanged by hangman William Marwood's long drop procedure, which killed the condemned person instantly rather than letting them strangle slowly. She was said to have gone to her death with dignity and without struggle or fight, and she confessed on the evening of the execution to being the murderer and no one else being involved. As usual, that sinister little person from Madame Tussauds was waiting for Kate to be cut down with his bucket of plaster of Paris, and she was on show in the Chamber of Horrors within the week. She is buried in the grounds of Wandsworth Prison. So, what do we know about Kate Webster before the murder and her subsequent trial and execution? She was born Catherine Lawler in Callan, County Wexford, Ireland in 1849. She took to petty thieving and pickpocketing at an early age and wasn't very good at either. When she went into prison at 15, she decided when she got out she was going to save enough of her ill-gotten gains to get a ferry and try her luck in England, which she did. Arriving, she proclaimed to anyone who would listen that she had married a sea captain called Webster, had 4 children with him, but he and the children had all died and she was now a poor lonely widow, All utter rubbish, of course. Kate arrived in Liverpool in 1867, and by 1868 she was serving 4 years in prison for larceny. In 1872, when she was released, she decided to try the bright lights of London, so moved down to Hammersmith, where she became neighbours with the Porters. She later moved to Notting Hill, where she got pregnant, maybe by a man called Strong, but Kate was also working as a sex worker at the time, so this can't be confirmed. However, the baby was a boy called John, and there is no doubt she loved and cared for him dearly. She went to prison in 1875 for 36 charges of theft, her favourite trick being to rent a room, then sell everything in it before the rent became due and leave the property sharpish. While she was in prison, John was looked after by a lady who seems to have been a great friend called Sarah Crease. She was a charwoman cum maid for a Miss Lodore. When Kate was released from prison, Sarah was taken ill for a while, and Miss Lodore took on Kate temporarily until Sarah was back on her feet. She was so impressed with her work that Miss Lodore, knowing that her friend Julia Thomas was looking for a housekeeper, recommended Kate to her. But Julia, a twice married ex-schoolmistress, was very particular about the way she liked things done and would criticise Kate's work, which is understandable. Kate wasn't the best cleaner in the world and would much rather be at the pub next door. Julia quite bravely took the decision to give her notice to leave her employment, and that takes us to the beginning of our story. But what about Julia's head, I hear you ask? Well, that's a story all on its own. In October 2010, workmen working on an extension to the house of famous naturist Sir David Attenborough dug up a skull from what would have been the floor of the stables of the hole-in-the-wall pub. After reviewing records of the murder and doing radiocarbon testing, they found the skull was of a white female of menopausal age missing its teeth, with injuries consistent of a fall down the stairs and evidence of the skull being in water, and it was laying on Victorian floor tiles. The coroner was happy to accept this was the skull of Julia Thomas and to be buried with the rest of her body. But was it Julia's head? I did a bit of delving in the newspaper archives and found 2 stories the day after Kate's execution that said on the eve of her hanging, Kate made a statement saying that she had dropped a bag containing Julia's head down between 2 upright supports of Barnes Bridge. She claimed it stayed between the supports right down until it got to the bottom, and its non-discovery was due to it becoming embedded in that position. Why would she lie? There are a couple of things I'd like to say about this story. After research, I can find no real proof that Kate did actually hit Julia with an axe. Nearly all the reports say she threw or pushed her down the stairs, then strangled her. So that's a mystery. I'd like to clear that one up. I think the stories, number 2 is, I think the stories of Kate making Julia's body fat into delicious lard / dripping to sell to children and pub regulars is a myth tagged on later to sensationalise the story. Kate was in the money. She didn't need to make a few pennies through selling some jars of lard, but good story all the same. And number 3, so not a couple of points then, is the evidence of Mary Durden. Hers is the only showing premeditation. I don't really trust that evidence. I think Kate Webster pushed Julia Thomas down the stairs in a fit of temper, then strangled her because she panicked. I'm not defending her in any way, but I don't think she was the monster she was depicted as. But in no way did Julia deserve what happened to her. Kate was no angel, and that is for sure. A sad footnote was that after the sentencing, the uncle refused to look after the son, John, anymore, and the lad was put into a workhouse, and I can find no information after that. So that's very sad. Well, I hope you found that story of interest. And that's the end. And if you are now switching me off, then thank you so much for watching, and sleep well, and I hope I'll see you next time. Night night. And if you are one of those masochists who have stuck around to listen to the waffle bit, thank you. It's always nice to have a bit of company when you are waffling. So the waffle on the YouTube channel is slightly different to the podcast one, even though I doubt people listen to both. So firstly, once again, I have to say a big thank you to Lindsay of Stolen From Me YouTube channel. It was just a lovely lady. She has a monster following. And just when I was about to pack it all in, she put a shout out for me, and lots of her lovely fans decided to have a look at my channel, and they decided to subscribe and stay. So all I can say is I love Lindsay and I love her followers. Thank you so much. Also, I must mention my mate Stuart Blues from British Murders YouTube channel and podcast. Stuart hosts a fantastic podcast and is also a really top bloke. He put a shout out to me on his last episode and also played my promo, which is doubly fantastic because I don't have one. So he kindly made one for me. So thank you so much, Stuart. Give him a listen. I think you will love his dry Yorkshire humour. As always, I'd like to shout out to Gisela Kay of Grizzly Books podcast and YouTube channel, who is gradually taking over the world with her true crime books and stories, and also her Gisela Kay self-help videos on Instagram. Check her out, she's amazing. Also, a big hug to my friend and fellow collaborator Debbie Q of the Right Shoe podcast, who's been a bit poorly but is now home from hospital and putting out great stories again, like her latest episode about John Holmes and the Wonderland killings. Brilliant, Debbie. 13 inches? Really? Ooh, that'll make your eyes water. Anyway, I think that's me done. I hope someone is still awake out there to hear me say thank you so much for listening. You've made an old man very happy. And night night, don't let the frogs in boxes bite. And I'll see you next time. Good night.